Hi, I'm Jake, and I'm here to show you how to speed paint Space Marines using true metallic metal. I've been in love with Warhammer for a very long time now, for a multitude of reasons, really. One of my favorite reasons, however, are how uniquely people around the globe are able to enjoy the hobby in their own different ways. Some folks enjoy the hobby to just build and paint models, whereas others take a deep dive into competing regularly in gaming tournaments as well as painting competitions. Most of us seem to fall somewhere in between, which means we tend to have some kind of common ground no matter which route you enjoy the hobby. You're probably wanting to show off a nicely painted one. The method that I'm sharing with you today is definitely more of a get fully painted faster to get your tabletop ready efficiently. So what is true metallic metal? Well, it's really just a fancy way of saying painting metal using metallic paints. I first discovered this technique on my own when Citadel contrast paints came out in 2019. Given the consistency of how the contrast paints flow, you'll notice it's somewhere between a wash and a really thinned down layer paint, if you're familiar with GWs. This technique can also fit in nicely with other non-metallic paint styles as long as they follow a similar scheme, and I'm going to share some of my own collection with you where I painted my Ultramarines. This entire army I painted up last year, actually. The way the light reflects off the armor under most environments will adapt accordingly, making it look really natural. Some might argue that there's not even a point in learning NMM, which is non-metallic metal, style of painting when you can apply techniques such as these. To give you a frame of context on how quickly this can be accomplished, I painted up roughly 2,000 points of my Ultramarines, like I mentioned, in less than 30 days. Lollygagging, of course, and being distracted by other projects in between with still some time to spare, it wasn't too bad. However, I do consider myself a relatively fast painter, but no matter what, try not to stress yourself out and enjoy the process as you go. Don't get me wrong, I probably spent a full day of painting to get each of the HQs and the experimental Eliminator's cloak, as I showcased there, to stand out from the rest of my army, but it was all relatively quick and painless once I figured the entire process out as well as how the paint flows. All right, that's the end of story time. Now let's get started.
First of all, you're going to want to undercoat your miniature with lead belcher. I really like using the spray just for faster to get an end goal that looks like this. Select the contrast paint of your choice depending on what chapter you are trying to paint up and the coloring that you want to achieve. There's a multitude of choices, so just pick whatever looks best to you and test it out on a sample model. This one is optional in my opinion. I live in a dry climate and I still don't need to, but if you want to, then go for it just to thin it down. And of course, you're going to need paintbrushes. Always use synthetics when using contrast paints and ink. From my personal experience, I've found that synthetic hair is going to spread and absorb the best. All right, so we're going to get started here. The points and the panels that you're going to first choose to paint, I would suggest starting with more detailed panels, such as the legs. And in this case, I'm going to use Talisar Blue to achieve the Ultramarine scheme and the color that I've used to paint my entire army. I'm just going to show you on the knee pad first how it goes on and how the texture is. It's a little blurry, I apologize. But once you start going, just keep spreading the paint. So the object here is to spread the paint rather than dabbing it on like you normally would with traditional layer paints. As you move on to the more detailed parts of the miniature, you can pull it a little bit more, and it's okay because the details are going to absorb it. But just make sure to keep in mind that you can move around the paint as the paint is wet. Once it dries, that's where it gets a little bit sketchy. Let it dry first and inspect it before you move on to the next step. In the interest of education, I'm going to move on to Blood Angels next. This is a nice orange-based color that comes out really well for Blood Angel Space Marine schemes. So I'm going to start with the other leg panel just to show you the contrasting elements between the blue and the red, just like for my Sergeant example. But just keep dabbing that on. So blurry, sorry. Just keep dabbing it on, and different paints, unfortunately you can't see it too well here, but different paints or contrast paints have different consistencies. So it might seem and appear oily. It's okay. Just keep dabbing a little bit more contrast paint on and make sure to spread it out until all the surface areas are sufficiently covered here. So take your time. There's no need to rush. Just make sure that you have full and complete coverage. So once your paint dries, you can see that it dries a little bit differently. It's the same color scheme that I used for my Ultramarines just to show you. For the next panel, which is the chest, I'm going to paint on Iyanden yellow, which is actually really nice for Imperial Fists. Just keep dabbing that on. You don't need to be entirely careful, but just place it where you want to place it. It's as simple as that. Yellow is a little bit thinner on this in the contrast paint, so just be careful, add more as needed. For salamanders, Warp Lightning seems to be the logical choice, but I've had my differences with it. So you could try Creed Camo, you could even try the darker version of the contrast paints. Forgive me for not remembering what that name is. But regardless, so Warp Lightning is a good place to start. Now, when working on flatter surfaces like the shoulder armor, you're going to want to move the paint along those lines very carefully and spreading them and following the curvature of the model more so than pooling it like we were in the more detailed panels. So just take your time again and just spread it around. Warp speed time, so I can finish painting this up while not boring you on camera. If you want to take your paint job to an even further level, you can actually darken the recesses and the shadow points as desired by just adding in more of said contrast color paint. So all you need to do is just paint on wherever the light would be darkest and darken it. All right, we're almost done. So Black Templar, arguably one of the best contrast paints ever made. You want to use Black Templar to actually get the crevices and the armor joints. This is so much cleaner than using Abaddon Black, for example, because it's just a lot more forgiving. Just let it pool in there and then let it dry. Lastly, this is just a bonus round, but I'm going to show you how I paint my trim. I love using Balthazar Gold. That's kind of my standard for Space Marines. Obviously, you need a steady hand because this isn't a complete shortcut to everything in life, but you just want to trim that on. And as you can see, just painting on that Balthazar Gold, it just matches so fluidly and organically along with the rest of your power armor. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, man, now we got a Rasta custom Space Marine chapter. I'm just joking. Anyways, now you can see how the different colors interacted and how they look once they're dry. Just select the right contrast color that you desire.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. For more content, please stay subscribed and join the conversation in the comments below to let me know what you think. That's what keeps YouTube channels going and growing. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.